do what thou wilt, shall be the whole of the law. For the Thelemic order, I'm sibling James Gordon. Today, we introduce our second work that we'll be in contact with during the Thelemic Holy Season. This is Liber 65, or Liber Cordis Cincti Serpente, the book of the heart girt with a serpent. Now, this book was published in the Thelema collection in 1909, and is an account of the relations of the aspirant and his holy guardian angel. If you haven't read it, there's a wonderful little collection of the parables and lessons of Liber 65 by 131, which I'm going to link to in the comments below. Over the Holy Season, we're going to be hearing a lot more from this book. Now, you may think we're straying from Liber 7, which is about initiation, to wander into a discussion of the Holy Guardian Angel, which is a ridiculous term in the first place. And when I say ridiculous, before you get offended, I'm going to say that I'm quoting, and let's see what Crowley originally had to say about the HGA. Writing of himself in the third person as the Master Therian, Crowley says, "His will was sufficiently informed by common sense to decide to teach man the next step, the thing which was immediately above him. He might have called this God, or the higher self, or the Ogeides, or the Adi Buddha, or 61 other things. But he had discovered that these were all one, and yet each one represented some theory of the universe which would ultimately be shattered by criticism. For he had already passed through the realm of reason, and knew that every statement contained an absurdity. He therefore said, 'Let me declare this work under the title of The Obtaining of the Knowledge and Conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel, because the theory implied in these words is so patently absurd that only simpletons would waste much time in analyzing it. It would be accepted as a convention, and no one would incur the grave danger of building a philosophical system upon it.' To some extent, we're looking at a thing which needs to be experienced to be fully understood, and that's why it's very difficult to put a specific word on it. For a discussion of the writing of Liber 7 and Liber 65, you can take a look at yesterday's video, where we looked at the element of plenary inspiration. So now the first chapter of Liber 65. I am the heart, and the snake is entwined about the invisible core of the mind. Rise, O my snake, it is now the hour of the hooded and holy ineffable flower. Rise, O my snake, into brilliance of bloom, on the corpse of Osiris afloat in the tomb. O heart of my mother, my sister, mine own, thou art given denial to the terror Typhon. Ah me, but the glory of ravening storm enswathes thee and wraps thee in frenzy of form. Be still, O my soul, that the spell may dissolve, as the wands are upraised and the aeons revolve. Behold in my beauty how joyous thou art, O snake that caresses the crown of mine heart. Behold, we are one, and the tempest of years goes down to the dusk, and the beetle appears. O beetle, the drone of thy dolorous note, be ever the trance of this tremulous throat. I await the awakening, the summons on high, from the Lord Adonai. From the Lord Adonai. Adonai spake unto VVVVV, saying, There must ever be division in the word. For the colors are many, but the light is one. Therefore thou writest that which is mother of emerald, and of lapis lazuli, and of turquoise, and of alexandrite. Another writest the words of topaz, and deep amethyst, and of grey sapphire, and of deep sapphire with a tinge of blood. Therefore do ye fret yourselves because of this. Be not contented with the image. I, who am the image of image, say this. Debate not the image, saying, Beyond, beyond. One mounteth under the crown by the moon, and by the sun, and by the arrow, and by the foundation, and by the dark comb of the stars from the black earth. Not otherwise may ye reach unto the smooth point. Nor is it fitting for the cobbler to prate of the royal matter. O cobbler, mend me this shoe that I may walk. O king, if I be thy son, let us speak to the embassy of the king thy brother. Then there was silence. Speech had done with us a while. There's a light so strenuous that it is not perceived as light. Wolfsbane is not so sharp as steel, yet it pierced the body more subtly. Even as evil kisses corrupt the blood, so do my words devour the spirit of man. I breathe, and there is infinite dis-ease in the spirit. As an acid eats into steel, as a cancer that utterly corrupts the body, so I am unto the spirit of man. I shall not rest until I have dissolved it all. So also the light that is absorbed. One absorbs little and is called white, and glistening. One absorbs all and is called black. Therefore, O my darling, art thou black. O my beautiful, I have likened thee to a jet Nubian slave, a boy of melancholy eyes. O the filthy one, the dog, they cry against thee, because thou art my beloved. Happy are they that praise thee, for they see thee with mine eyes. Not aloud shall they praise thee, but in the night watch, one shall steal close and grip thee with a secret grip, and another shall privily cast a crown of violets over thee. A third shall greatly dare, and press mad lips to thine. Yea, the night shall cover all. The night shall cover all. Thou wast long seeking me. Thou didst run forward so fast that I was unable to come up with thee. O thou darling fool, what bitterness thou didst crown thy days withal. Now I am with thee, I will never leave thy being, for I am the soft sinuous one entwined about thee, heart of gold. My head is jeweled with 12 stars. My body is white as the milk of stars. It is bright with the blue of the abyss of stars invisible. I have found that which could not be found. I have found a vessel of quicksilver. Thou shalt instruct the servant in his ways. Thou shalt speak often with him. The scribe looketh upwards and crieth, Amen, thou hast spoken it, Lord God. Further, Adonai spake unto VVVVV and said, Let us take our delight in the multitude of men. Let us shape unto ourselves a boat of mother and pearl from them, that we may ride upon the river of Amrit. Thou seest yon petal of amaranth, blown by the wind from the low sweet brows of Hathor? The magister saw it, and greatly rejoiced at the beauty of it. Listen. From a certain world came an infinite wail. That falling petal seemed to the little ones a wave to engulf their continent. So they will reproach the servant, saying, Who hath set thee to save us? He will be sore distressed. All they understand not that thou and I are fashioning a boat of mother of pearl. We will sail down the river of Amrit, even to the yew groves of Yama, where we may rejoice exceedingly. The joy of men shall be our silver gleam, their woe our blue gleam, all in the mother of pearl. The scribe was wroth thereat. He spake, O Adonai, my master, I have borne the inkhorn and the pen without pay, in order that I might search this river of Amrit, and sail thereupon as one of ye. This I demand for my fee, that I partake of the echo of your kisses. And immediately it was granted unto him. Nay, but not therewith was he content. By an infinite abasement unto shame did he strive. Then a voice, Thou strivest ever, even in thy yielding thou strivest to yield, and lo, thou yieldest not. Go thou unto the outermost places, and subdue all things. Subdue thy fear and thy disgust, then yield. There was a maiden that strayed among the corn and sighed. Then grew a new birth, a narcissus, and therein she forgot her sighing and her loneliness. Even instantly rode Hades heavily upon her, and ravished her away. Then the scribe knew the narcissus in his heart, but because it came not to his lips, therefore was he shamed, and spake no more. Adonai spake yet again with VVVVV, and said, The earth is ripe for vintage, let us eat of her grapes, and be drunken thereon. And VVV answered him, and said, O my lord, my dove, my excellent one, how shall this word seem unto the children of men? And he answered him, Not as thou canst see. It is certain that every letter of this cipher has some value, but who shall determine the value? For it varieth ever according to the subtlety of him that made it. And he answered him, Have I not the key thereof? I am clothed with a body of flesh. I am one with the eternal and omnipotent God. Then said Adonai, Thou hast the head of the hawk, and thy phallus is the phallus of Asar. Thou knowest the white, and thou knowest the black, and thou knowest that these are one. But why seekest thou the knowledge of their equivalents? And he said, That my work may be right. And Adonai said, The strong brown reaper swept his swath and rejoiced. The wise man counted his muscles and pondered and understood not and was sad. Reap thou and rejoice. Then was the adept glad and lifted his arm. Lo, an earthquake and plague and terror of the earth, a casting down of them that sate in high places, a famine upon the multitude, and the grape fell ripe and rich into his mouth. Stained is the purple of thy mouth, O brilliant one, with a white glory of the lips of Adonai. The foam of the grape is like the storm upon the sea. The ships tremble and shudder. The shipmaster is afraid. That is thy drunkenness, O Holy One, and the winds whirl away the soul of the scribe into the happy haven. O Lord God, let the haven be cast down by the fury of the storm. Let the foam of the grape tincture my soul with thy light. Bacchus grew old and was Silenus. Pan was ever Pan, forever and evermore throughout the eons. Intoxicate the inmost, O my lover, not the outermost. So it was ever the same. I have aimed at the peeled wand of my God, and I have hit. Yea, I have hit. Now, this evening I'm going to talk a little about the element of inspiration in Thelema, and the concept of Thelema as a complete revelation. That relates to the Holy Guardian Angel because Crowley identified Eos as his Holy Guardian Angel. And that's definitive and repeated in a couple of places. Now, there are plenty of people who are reductionist in regards to Thelema. We have this convenient saying, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. So, since that's the whole of the law, you don't really need to know anything else, right? It's a little more complex than that. The thing you learn when you look at Thelema as a complete revelation, and you read what is written about will in various places, is that there is a presumption it takes a good bit of work and energy to discover. You can argue about exactly what will is, but it is definitely not whatever I want. Let's be realistic. Taking Thelema to be do whatever you want shall be the whole of the law is toxic. We're also told numerous places that if we are following our will, we shouldn't be colliding with other stars in the company of stars. Crowley muses about this in a few places, and a lot of people like to take those musings and trump them into an excuse to be assholes. Let's put the whole thing differently. Crowley was a pretty smart guy. You can argue details, but he wasn't an imbecile slobbering at the curb. If the point of Thelema was do whatever you want, he would have committed the rest of his life to writing books about it, many of which he published at a loss. For that matter, if the Spirit dictated Liber all and considered that a complete and sufficient revelation, would there have been additional material? Yes, do what thou wilt is the core, and Liber all is a larger statement of the core which completes it with the other key elements to make that core even vaguely comprehensible, like the understanding that every person is a star. But there's a lot more to understand. Certainly you can live a Thelemic life, that is to say live by Thelemic ethics, on those words alone, and you may be one of those lucky people who, for whatever reason, has a really strong feeling and understanding for your own will. But most of us do not. Most of us are adrift, just going from day to day, and even when we think we have a powerful grasp on our will, it often turns out maybe we didn't. So, we have this idea, which came from Voltaire and got enshrined in a lot of the 1960s and later movies and literature, of someone who is ascended as being completely indrawn and contemplative. They're happy, they aren't bothered by anything, they take all things as they come, they sit on a mountaintop. Now, there's something to be said for those qualities. In the 1960s sense, they're somewhat reinforced by Buddhism, which dictates, and I'm simplifying here, that the world is suffering, so simply being in a harmonious state is enough to transcend it. Crowley took a lot of good ideas from his Buddhist friend Alan Bennett, And to be clear, Bennett was an actual monk living in Ceylon and Colombo and learning Pali, and really one of the first Englishmen to do that, not some guru who'd read some paperbacks and lived in a walk-up flat in Kensington. But Crowley explicitly rejected the idea that the world is suffering and sorrow, and embraced the idea that the pleasures of the world are to be embraced, and more importantly, that the world is to be embraced and engaged with. We are incarnate for a reason, and that reason is most likely not to contemplate dust motes. Thelema teaches us a profound and passionate engagement with our material world. The medieval Gnostics also thought the world was a prison and wanted to think their way out of it. That's not Thelema. The point of attainment is to gain perspective and insight and learn how best to engage with the world, not to escape it. And there's always a but in Thelema. You have to say, sure, maybe somebody's will is to sit in contemplation, because you can't prove otherwise. Well, what we can say is that for most of us, our will is to move in a direction and accomplish something, not simply to be until we die. So, Thelema is an unfolding revelation, and most of that revelation is essentially an adventurer's path to discovering will. It's a combination of roadmaps like Liber 65, Liber Cordis Cincti Serpente, and Liber 7, Liber Lapidus Lazuli, and tools like Liber Abba Book 4. So, let's talk for a moment about the idea of Thelema as an inspired body of work in the holy books of Thelema. Now, I'm not going to dispute for a moment that the holy books are very important, but I also think that we get bogged down in a lot of technical bean counting when it comes to them, and may miss the forest for the trees. So first, there's a very complex system of classification, which Crowley used, from Class A to Class D. Class A consists of books which may not be changed so much as the style of a letter. That is, they represent the utterance of an adept entirely beyond the criticism of even the visible head of the organization. Class B consists of books or essays which are the resort of ordinary scholarship. Class C is regarded as suggestive rather than anything else. Class D, official rituals and instructions. Class E, public announcements and broadsheets. Now, a thing to remember is that this was a breakdown explicitly for Crowley's AA students. It was a functional evaluation of the time. There are questions not answered. The commentary on the Book of the Law by the Prophet is mandated in Liber All itself. Even if it's considered to be a work of scholarship, does not the fact that it was mandated by Liber All make it a critical part of the corpus. Liber 60, the Abbot D's working, is not classified, but it was certainly inspired and gave rise to Book 4, which therefore is also mandated. Some publications are composite and pertain to more than one class. That is to say, they're ordinary commentary wrapped around an inspired core. The most important examples of that are probably Liber 418, The Vision and the Voice, and Liber 415, Opus Lutitaneum, the Paris working. Now, these are not just interesting things to study. They contain the elements by which we can interpret Thelema, their keys and guideposts. But some of the inspired material is also marked as Class C, such as the Amelantra working. There's no doubt whatsoever that this material was inspired, and the fact that it is suggestive means Crowley didn't know what to make of it exactly. Kenneth Grant made quite a lot of it, and there's an entire cult of Lamb that links Thelema to modern, what the producers of the Hellier show would probably call high weirdness. Whether you agree with that or disagree with it, the material is certainly rich, just not absolutely firm ground, and there are a lot of questions to be asked. But if we're going to accept Thelema as an entire revelation, we need to understand that material, and accept that it has a place. I think the classification system Crowley designed for AA is useful. The holy books of Thelema are typically taken to be the Class A publications, though they weren't all actually published in his collection, Thelema. But I also think it has limits and was designed to meet a specific need, and doesn't necessarily need to be the only thing which informs our understandings of Thelema. Another viewpoint is to look at the workings as a series of engagements, each with its own merits and issues, but each also sequentially exposing a new slice of Thelema. The AA itself exists, and for some students it can provide a good system of initiation. The problem is that over time it's divided into numerous groups, generally referred to as strains or lineages, and they're not all equal. I'm going to say right now that I am not and never have been a member of any AA group, but I know quite a bit about them because it's my business to know about these things. I personally don't really care about dissent, but I think if you claim to be a group, it might actually be respectful to have a legitimate line of dissent from the group that you claim to be. I would never claim to represent Crowley's OTO, for example. Ironically, those AA groups with less realistic claims on heritage also tend to push a form of Thelema that's barely recognizable to anyone who understands its humanitarian and progressive core. I'm just going to say that if you decide to go seeking the AA, look for those leaders whose published works or private conversations reflect the values that you already yourself understand to be the core of Thelema. Find the AA that conforms to you, do not conform yourself to anyone else's program. But clearly, AA is not going to be how most people encounter Thelema. It's very personal, and the mechanism of personal relationships between student and teacher can be a great, wonderful benefit, but it absolutely limits the growth. So for the rest of us, the material is here and available, and we just need to know what to make of it. I also think we need to consider that the Thelemic revelation does not stop with Crowley. Thelema didn't freeze in place in 1947. And I'm not just talking about modern commentators writing about Crowley's work. Obviously, not every writing is going to be accepted by every person, but I think there are materials, including the work created by Parsons and Cameron, Lee Heflin's Island Dialogues, the work that Patrick King did in support of the rights of Shiraz, and those are more than just simple addenda. They tend to suggest Thelema as an ongoing revelation. Of course, everyone has a fourth book of Liber All, and it can be hard to sort out the work that has significance from the work which is at best personal and at worst potentially badly fractured. I think the initial revelation, when it's fully understood, provides the keys to that. If what we're reading is really at odds with Thelema as we understand it, I think that's going to be very obvious. I also think there's a lot of merit in the exploratory work, whatever its class. I had someone tell me that they accepted Liber All only because they accepted Aowas, but not Crowley. And I think that's a trope. You find people who see Crowley as a sort of broken British man who just happened to receive a revelation because he was messed up at the right time, and that goes with a sort of fantastic Ozzy Osbourne image of Crowley that comes from a few movies or literary references rather than knowing the first thing about his actual life and work. But that's clearly not the case, and essentially springs from an ignorance of the rest of the work. It also fails to acknowledge that if we accept Aowas' message, we also accept that Aowas was Crowley's holy guardian angel, and thus a motivating hand standing behind all of his work. And I think that's important because it's by reading the breadth of the literature that you get a sense of the actual meaning of Thelema. Yes, Crowley says some things that are repugnant by today's standards. He liked to shock, and he was born in the British Empire, and he had some imperialist values, so which he shed over time. He changed. It's hard to be sympathetic when you take the quotes where he's being intentionally obtuse or provocative or inflammatory. If you read the breadth of material, you have someone who is very sensitive and fairly self-analytical. Like most of us, as he aged, he became aware that he was an asshole when he was younger. In Confessions, his autohagiography, he said, "I was simply too young, ignorant, and bigoted to make any impression on the United States." He also talked about his personal growth. That I might understand the problems which I should later be called on to settle, it was necessary to bring me into intimate personal contact with the very varied conditions of mankind. Before this journey, I had not even begun to understand what America meant. I ignored it, disliked it. My only idea of dealing with it was that of an ignorant nurse, to smack it into propriety. It had hardly occurred to me to inquire why such poetry as that of Keats and myself was not the daily joy of Minnesota farmers. I thought it simply showed their baseness. I now understand that those bonds of brotherhood which make mankind a spiritual unity are everywhere identical, though their appearance varies so as to be unrecognizable to all but a very few initiates. We were meant to be those few initiates. By understanding the whole of Thelema as an unfolding revelation, we can gain that understanding of spiritual unity, and the understanding that spiritual unity, not anarcho-capitalist nihilism, is what underlies Thelema. I'll add that's a statement not just about the U.S., but about general upper-middle-class contempt for the struggles of working people, and people who did not have the benefits of a solid education. After 1919, you see the emergence of a much less elitist viewpoint in Crowley's work and in Thelema. The failure of British democracy to avoid the Great War and the rise of populism still poison some of the viewpoint in some of his political writing. The problem is that most of us don't have time to read thousands of pages of very obscure writing to distill that. The intention was always that an initiatory system should lay at the core of Thelema, conveying its values and path experientially, while the written material revolved around it. Now, I'm not going to resist the opportunity to give a plug here, and I can say this is certainly a core value of the Thelemic initiations. An initiatory path that is immersed in, rather than being somewhat peripheral to, the entirety of the Thelemic revelation. So, more information about that in the comments. I hope that in the last few minutes, I've opened some horizons for you, and that as we go through this Thelemic holy season that culminates in the writing of Liber All, you'll begin to see the 3 days as a jumping-off point, not as an end point, and use it as your springboard for your own explorations into the holy books of Thelema and beyond. For the Thelemic Order, I'm Sibling James Gordon. Love is the law, love under will.